All right, now in the manual, what it suggests is 400 millimeters between the rear bulkhead and the back of this panel. And we're going to measure that from basically the back of this upper bulkhead bar to the back of the body. Now we are off quite a bit. The other one thing you want to do is make sure that you're on the bar underneath here. There's a chassis tube that comes down on the bottom. You want to make sure the body is up against that. So right now we're close on this side, but we're not close on the driver's side. So yeah, I'm going to fight with this a bit more and until we get to measurement, and then I'll bring you back for the next step. Okay, after some fiddling, because it does take a little bit of trying to get this lower lip up against the chassis, to get this lip on this little bit that sticks out on the chassis, and then to make everything even across the top. So you're going to measure from basically this plane here on the back to the bulkhead bar here, and that distance needs to be 400 millimeters according to the manual. So that's what I've done. I've got that set up. There's a couple things. So once you do that, once you get it set up, what I suggest doing is just drill a rivet hole, the first one on this tube here, up on the panel here, both sides. And that's going to be a datum point now. And from here, make sure that this is level. It's kind of hard to see with the dolly or whatever, but we want to make sure that this is level, and it should be, because this bottom thing is going to be level. We're referencing the chassis, so it's just going to pick up all the chassis points. But with this all set, the next step is, if we look inside, so the chassis bar runs here, and what we want to do is take a Sharpie and draw a line up the inside, and that's going to be a reference point to cut through. So basically the next step is we're going to trim this panel, and we're going to trim it where this chassis bar goes down to a certain point down on the lower edge here, where this lower edge is going to be a 90-degree cut, and it's going to go up to a point where it meets this chassis bar. And the instructions for this are in the manual, but roughly this point down here is 230 millimeters to the back of the car. So you're going to measure 230 millimeters from the back to here, and then a 90-degree mark using like a square or something just up until it meets this tube here. And then we're going to trim off the excess. And then the next bit is we're going to finish drilling some rivet holes down this. Not too many, like 4 or 5 or so. And then this panel will be basically ready. And then we can move on to the side panels. So we were working on the rear panel here. It's a little bit of chicken and egg, and you'll sort of end up at a happy medium. But there's a few things so far that I just want to make a note of as I'm going. Because again, this is the first time I've done it with this kit, and there's a couple things that I've noticed. So first off, in the back here, our tank straps on either side are really close to the back of this panel. And in fact, I had to take these off and trim it back. And then you'll see these tubes on either side. And what I would suggest is, before fitting this, take a flat edge and run it on the outside of these tubes on either side. And make sure that these brackets, or these hold down clamps for the tank, don't go into that space, or don't go past that straight edge. Second thing is, it's hard to, so you set this depth here to the flat edge or the back edge of the rear panel, and I put a couple of rivets in, and I think I did it just a little bit too soon. It'll be hidden, so it's no big deal, but you want to make sure that your side panel and your rear tub line up before you start sinking any rivets in, or before you start drilling any holes for any kind of reference or to hold the panel down, because this edge and these you're going to have to trim to fit. So like on this side, I haven't done that yet, and they overlap, and then as you kind of fight with this panel, you get it into place, you'll notice that there's an overlap, and what you have to do is trim this rear tub to match. Going down the side panels, you can see it's already, pretty close here, up and down on the side. Going forward, so you'll want to line up this arch, back against this part of the tube. Try to pull it in and then pull it down with clamps like I've done here. And all the measurements you're going to find for cutting holes further up the panel, reference datum K, which is this crease here on the panel up and down. So when you're getting everything into place, you're going to have to notch this panel for the whatever the pegs or the mounting for the scuttle. And then once that's done, you can pull everything up against the chassis, and then I will I'll throw some tape down, mark our datum line, and then start measuring forward. If you look on the other panel here, as you go forward, there's a few things that we're going to need to cut holes for. Is our exhaust on this side, which is from our K series, or if you're running a DuraTech, that's going to exit on the passenger side for US drivers. We need to cut holes for our suspension. And then up front here, we're going to need to cut holes for our steering rack. And then for wiring, pass through for the lights, etc. All that stuff needs to come through. Brake lines too. Now that we loosely have it in place, I'm going to put some tape down, and we can start measuring where our cuts will need to be here in the front of these panels. Side panel back off the car, got it taped up, measured and marked, or at least the passenger side. But I wanted to get this far and kind of show you how I've done it, because I'm going to repeat this process on the driver's side with one exception. So in the instructions, they list different measurements and datum points. The biggest one is going to be datum point K. I marked it out previously, or I showed you there's a kink in this panel. Basically, it's right around this area here where the scuttle begins. And it's easy to spot because it's a crease that goes all the way across the panel. And so what I did is I put down a piece of tape, I marked the top and bottom, drew a nice straight line across it, and then from there I actually put just a square or something that I can hook a measuring tape on, and just held it in place with some clamps. One thing I will suggest is if you care about the finish of these panels, that you protect it with some tape anywhere that anything is going to be touching. You don't have to worry about damaging it too much. It is a gel coat. You could basically just polish it down for years and years, because it's much thicker and tougher than paint. So you don't have to worry too much about it, but you do want to offer some protection. I'm going to be painting mine, so I'm being a little less careful with it than I would otherwise. Now, from our datum point K, our first set of measurements is 1165 millimeters. And that brings us to a second datum line that you will see in the manual, which is this one here, which is basically our first set of suspension upright mounting points, or whatever, our AR mounts fall in line on this mark. And so same thing, lay down a couple marks, draw a straight line across it, and that's going to be where your first set of suspension points are going to go. And then from this mark, you can measure out to the rest. And so I've already laid out, these are for our upper arm, these are for our lower arm, this is where our steering rack comes through, and then this is a set of holes for, I believe, the front light assembly or something like that. All of these locations are laid out, as well as how big these holes need to be. I've approximated with hole saws and imperial measurements, but everything in the manual is listed in millimeters. The last thing is this hole here, which is our exhaust hole or exhaust port. And this isn't finalized. I might make this a little bit bigger because of the exhaust that I'll be sending through it. This is for the stock exhaust, which is here, which is a simple 4-to-1 collector with a 2.5-inch pipe out. However, I have different plans for my exhaust, and so what I might do is actually square this opening out a little bit. But first, I want to cut all these holes out, get the panel on the car, and then figure out if this lands where I want it to land. Because it's going to be right through this triangle here is where our K24 exhaust will exit the side. But I want to make sure that it has enough width, because we're going to be running large primaries, and I want to have the option to run a large 4-into-2-into-1 or 4 into a merged collector, but that would mean all 4 pipes need to come out of the side of the car and then into a merged collector down the side. So I just want to have options before we send everything off to paint. And if that means cutting the hole a little too big and then putting like a garnish plate or something around the exhaust, like a carbon plate or a stainless plate, something like that, I'm okay with that. But I don't want to have to cut the panel again after the fact, after it's been painted, and risk messing it up. So that's kind of my thinking there. So that being said, I'm going to start our measurements on the other panel, and from there we can start cutting these holes. I've been busy since the last time I cut filming, but you didn't miss too much. Yes, a lot of work was done, but honestly, it's not stuff that you haven't seen before. Basically, had a couple of friends over, Sean and Kuiper. Hi to you guys watching this after the fact. They were helping out a little bit with the panels. So where I last left off is we needed to drill these holes, which are done. We got them nice and finished out, got the holes linked up, and then I took a file to smooth down the edges from the front side and the back side. And as you can see, some of these holes line up and some not so much. If you look there, you can see the suspension mount is not really lining up with that hole. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Otherwise, I still haven't cut out the exhaust hole, so it is here, but if we follow this on the other side of the panel, it's kind of like in the middle here. And what I might do is, this is the hole in placement for the K20 supplement. And what I might do is extend it just a little bit out this way and then down and make this a square, basically a 4-inch square. Sorry, a little more than 4 inches, like 5 inches square. And because the reason I'm doing that is because it'll be overkill for this exhaust, but for the new exhaust that I'm having built, I want to have plenty of room for large primaries, and hopefully that'll give us a little fudge room. I talked about before how we can create like a trim panel to sort of hide our crimes after the fact, and we may end up doing that. But for now, I just want to make sure that the hole is big enough. We'll come back to this stuff in a moment. As far as fitting the panels, it's a little fiddly, I'll say, because you have to pinch this way, you have to pinch this way, and sort of work your way around the panel. So what I did was, first things first was to pinch it this way so that our corners here lined up into the chassis, and then clamp this together and then in, and then start running our kind of rivet holes in. And all these clecos sticking out is basically forcing the panel on. And so I put a few in here, a few across the top, and then just ran my way forward. And then underneath, you can see we've got a handful underneath as well. But if you remember, we have our floor pans in already. So you can tell I didn't do as many down underneath. I didn't think it was necessary. I was mindful in dodging rivets that we had already put in for the floors. So that's just kind of a note for you guys. As when you're underneath, you can see where your existing rivets are. And I did, I think, a 200 millimeter spacing or thereabouts roughly as I went across the bottom. Up here, I believe these are about 150 millimeters spaced. From here, I just tried to use a measurement that looked good to the eye. So I think this is like 10 millimeters. This is 20 millimeters between here, and then 10 millimeters up till it's flat here. This is all basically jazz. When I talked about drilling the wrong hole, that was up here, this guy. On the other side, it's just 4 down the back, some down the side. Most of this is just going to be held on with the mastic or the bond-in seal. So you don't need to go absolutely crazy putting rivets in every 30 millimeters like we did on the Ultima. Basically, what I would suggest is trying to space them out evenly, because what is seen, like here, there is a bit of trim, but like up in here, you just want to make it look as nice as you can, space it out. Remember, you're going to be the one looking at it all the time, so really it's for your own sake. Onto the scuttle area, let's say. There is, on the scuttle, if we look in here, there's a couple of bolts that came through that we had to notch these panels for previously. And then you have to notch for this dash bar under here. And there's instructions on how to do that in the manual. What I will say, though, is we have some bonus holes. Extra lightning, as Mr. Chapman would say. And that was because you go by this, again, this datum point K line, and this is where this trailing edge of the cowl will sit, and it's like that on both sides. And they give you a measurement to go from this leading edge to where these bolts would go. And it was way off from what it was in the manual. So what I would suggest is line up this point here and then make your own marks in the back here until that gets corrected. Double check before you trust the straight up measurement in the manual. Likewise for these suspension hole saw area points or whatever, it didn't line up. And it could be that there just needs to be an errata, or I have an outdated version of the manual. Also under the scuttle, we have this sort of ECU and wiring panel that goes up under here. It's, again, clecoed into place, but it gets riveted to the chassis. On this guy, on the scuttle, you have your forward sort of finish panel. Couple notes about this panel. A, I had everyone at the factory sign this because as somebody who works in operations, a lot of operations people just get left behind. On camera, we get to see Sean and Neil and Andy, but for everyone else at the factory who's not on camera, they're still busting ass running brake lines, filling orders, doing paperwork, billing, whatever, you name it. There's so many more people behind the scenes than what you see on camera. So I really wanted everyone to sign this bulkhead panel because they're a part of these cars. They're a part of every car that goes out. And so many people like that just get lost in the background and they don't get credit for their part in making these things. So I just really wanted to call that out. And I plan on having everyone who helps out with this car to build it to also sign this panel. And then when everything's said and done, I'm going to have it cleared over so that it's protected and none of this stuff can rub off. Second thing about this panel is this is a bolt-in panel. So we have a couple of bolts here that go through this panel, through the side panel here, and then there's riv nuts in the actual chassis. And so it's got to go all the way through that. And it's a little bit tricky lining that up. What I did was I clamped it all into place and then put, drilled some 1/8-inch holes all the way down. And then with the hole in the chassis, I put the riv nut into the chassis and then widened the holes to fit an M6 nut, or an M6 bolt rather, through this panel, through the side panel, and then down into the chassis. I kind of wish in retrospect I'd have done M5 hardware, but c'est la vie. I'm going to go through and do matching hardware all the way across, again, so that this is a removable panel. It's a bolt-on, bolt-off. What's great about that is everything's accessible once you pull this off. So normally your battery would be sitting here, but I'm going to relocate the battery. And even then, we can't actually use this because if you notice down there, that's where the dry sump tank is going to sit, and it's actually going to come up through this area. And so we're going to have to do some kind of trickery to make sure that the top of the tank squares up inside of this battery opening, because I really want that to look like a finished product. What I might do is just come through here and cut all of this out inside of the battery tray and hope that the tank fits in here. It's 6 inches in diameter, so I'll know in a little bit when I measure it to see if that'll actually fit. Okay, back up here to our kind of fudge factor. Sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes those are your fault. Sometimes it's the fault of the literature you're following. But either or, mistakes happen. So what do we do after we've made the mistake? Well, you can see our hole is definitely in the wrong spot. And what we actually need to do is something like this. And that's probably what we're going to do is we're just going to take this hole, make another hole saw cut next to it, and then run our suspension through that just kind of elongated hole. Like, it sucks. It wasn't perfect the first try. Everything else lines up really, really well. But this just did not. Basically, everyone makes mistakes. It's how you correct them that determines the kind of person you are. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to make this look intentional. So it's getting kind of dark outside. You can hear the pitter-patter of the rain. Kind of a rainy weekend here. I was trying to get all of the body pre-fit into one video, but I think this video's already gone pretty long, so it's going to be a two-parter. What's left is to get the hood and the nose cone mounted and to do the rear fenders. That's most of the body work. That's all the important stuff. Besides that, we'll need to drill the holes for our wiper system in the cowl and any other holes that we need to drill in the bodywork to pass things through. So if there's any trim that needs to go through, if there's any wiring that needs to pass through, anything like that, we want to make sure we do that now before paint, and then we don't have to worry about screwing up that paint later. So that being said, thank you guys for watching. Next episode, we'll get this all wrapped up and get everything torn back down again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.